Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of RevOps Demos That Don't Suck. I am Matthew Volm, CEO and founder of RevOps Co-op, a global community of 13,000 plus revenue operations professionals from all across the globe. And it is in the title, but this series, during this series, we take demos with some of the leading innovative technology companies out there that are building tools and technologies and solutions for folks in revenue operations so that you can get a feel for their product, their solution, and their platform without having to go through the complete sales process. And like I said in the title, we promise that these demos will certainly not suck. And so we've got today Erik Mathiesen, who is the CEO and co-founder of Infer Labs. Infer Labs is a platform that helps you understand and optimize your business with AI by integrating with your CRM and a whole slew of other tools and technology. But Erik, thank you for being here, my friend. And I guess first thing is anything you want to add to that professional introduction that I just mentioned and the company introduction as well. And then I'll put you on the spot. I always like to see if there's any kind of fun, interesting personal facts that you want to drop that are not, business or RevOps or professional related that the audience might be interested to know.
Oh yeah, I can start with the company. I think that was a really good description of what we do. We've been around for a couple of years now. For now, we probably get into that later, why we started the company, the pain points we're solving. Yeah, personal, interesting fact. Both, I'm a very boring person. I live in the south of France. That's my only thing. Vineyards are right outside my window here.
Nice. That's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Well, I do. So it's not every day that we get to have a co-founder, kind of walking us through these things. So I guess take us back to the beginning, right? Why did you start the business, the company, and what are some of the problems that you all really set out to tackle that folks in revenue operations might be experiencing today?
Yeah. So when we going back to when we started the company, we weren't RevOps, revenue operations was sort of on our radar, and it was one of the problems that we wanted to tackle, but we were not specifically thinking only to solve problems in revenue operations. So we actually ended up building a very horizontal platform. But the pain points we had was I was leading RevOps teams, BI teams, data science teams, and Ryan as well was the senior data scientist. And we often found that we had so much internal data, say, in the data team or in the revenue operations team or in the finance team, that we felt we weren't doing enough with, like we weren't doing deeper analysis often. And to do this deep analysis, we would need to bring in the data scientists, we would need to bring in some of the machine learning engineers sometimes. And they were busy doing other things. They were building product. They were, they had a lot of other stuff on. So it was a pain point there. I felt that we had so much data and we didn't really understand enough about our internal data. For example, classic customer churn or like the KPIs that the CS team should be hitting in order to reduce the probabilities of churn or increase the probabilities of upsells. And we didn't truly understand that very well often. And I found that in a lot of businesses I work with, we were not that great always in understanding our customer base. So this was like the narrow problem. So we said, okay, let's try and solve this. Let's try and bring tools to data analysts, to RevOps people, because we believed there was a way to essentially abstract away the need for a data scientist. We thought you could build tools this point in time that would abstract away the need for understanding like machine learning in details, having a PhD in statistics, building a whole sort of infrastructure to run it. So that's what we set up doing. That was our initial sort of our initial plan was to build sort of a middle layer between your data layer and whatever application you are accessing your data from. It could be your CRM interface, it could be your BI tool. And then we would enable you to then use these new machine learning techniques or these new machine learning methods as you were querying data directly on your data. We set out doing that. We built essentially a middle layer between the data layer and the front end that was using, that was enhancing SQL, right? So SQL is the standard language that most analysts were using to query their database. And we thought, okay, this is the point where we can interject. This is the point where we can put some more advanced methods in. So we extended SQL with a few new commands that then underneath the hood was wrapping our sort of models, and they were all being executed on our large infrastructure inference layers and stuff. Then as we went to market with our product, we realized we need to build a bit more in the front end, because for people really to interact with it, they needed more. So we ended up building a fully fledged platform on the front end that does the scheduling, the running of jobs, it does metrics analysis, etc. But we are still really keen on integrating deeply into the tool systems of record as well. Like, so we see for a lot of stuff like understanding, tracking things, or understanding, doing things like lead scoring, or who's most likely to churn, or forecasting the pipeline, etc. That we want that to happen in your system of record. So we have ways of basically reverse engineering, of writing all our outcomes, our predictions back into those systems. And then when you want to do deep analysis, you go to our platform. Like, so if you want to understand, what are the drivers that are driving churn in our business? Like, what are the factors we should be aware of? Like, or if you want to dig deeper into your metrics. So one of the things we always talk about is explainable metrics. So your top of funnel has dropped by 10%, your win rate has dropped by 5% this month and month. Like, why? It's a common problem to try and understand what is the thing that changed, that drove this change. And those kind of, like I say, next layer up, sort of second layer analysis is what we do in our platform. So first layer, tracking things, dashboard, we say, do that in your system of record. We integrate deeply into them to give you the outcomes of the machine learning methods there. And then if you want to do deep analysis, go to our platform behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. I hope that made sense. That was a little bit of a roundabout way, but that's essentially what we do. And what we ended up doing is a story of sort of where we started to where we ended up doing today.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I know I've experienced it firsthand, the problem you brought up around, being a RevOps, BizOps leader. You have the problem is not typically, do you have the data? Most companies typically have data. They're sitting on a lot of data, but it's how do you generate the insights from the data that you have to figure out what you should do, right? What's working, what's not working, and then what actions do you need to take? And that's where historically I know same thing. I've needed a data team and engineering team. I've had to rely on someone else to accomplish that last step, which obviously just like takes time. The data team, like you said, they also have other priorities, right? Typically customer facing or product facing things that will just naturally be a higher priority. But then the other thing is also they're not, they're meant to serve typically the entire business, right? So they're also not subject matter experts on marketing, sales, CS, or revenue. And so trying to drive, get at the things that you want to get at is just also very, very hard to do.
Yeah, the way I see it, they often don't have, and I'm a data scientist, right? So I'm not, it's okay for me to say this, but they don't often understand the business necessarily. Like, that's not their background. That team will often sit close to tech. If it's a tech SaaS business, right? They'll sit alongside the tech teams. They won't necessarily have an understanding of the business logic and how the business runs, right? And that's really important, even to do something like, let's say, churn analysis. Like, what is a churn customer? How do you define it? How do we actually make sure that this analysis is done correct? And that the analyst, the RevOps person, is the expert in that field, right? That's what they do day to day. They understand it deeply. So that's why we wanted to give them the tools to then do the analysis. Because again, I've often found, once I convinced my data science team to do some analysis, you'll come back with a result, and maybe it wasn't right because there was a misunderstanding of exactly like how do we count revenue. Right? So like, okay, so then this analysis doesn't matter. Like the whole premise was wrong. So I think that's why we want to bring those tools to the experts on the business side.
Yep, makes sense. And so have a good grasp of the problem space, right? In terms of this disconnect between the data that you have, how to generate insights in a way that can be kind of fast and meaningful, right? Kind of put the power in your own hands. So how are you all kind of solving for that? Like, what does the product look like? What are, a couple of like key RevOps use cases for a tool like Infer Labs?
Yeah, okay, I have time to start showing the product in a sec. I'll quickly sort of give an overview of how we view things. We see it in three steps, so we have three components to our platform, really. And use cases spring out of that. One is what we call insights. So I think maybe on the website we talk about explore, predict, measure. Explore is about basically finding insights in your data, like what are the main key drivers of time to close. I was looking at time to close analysis just before, sort of like what drives a deal to close quickly or take a long time, right? This is a common question to try and understand. That's an insights question. It's a piece of ad hoc analysis. The next step in our platform, what we call predict, is about taking some of those models that you might have built in an insights project and turning into a pipeline. Like now you want to operationalize it. You want to run something every hour on your CRM data, and you want to take the outputs of that, a prediction, basically a prediction of who's going to churn, who's likely to be a good renewal, which deal is likely to close first, and put that back into your system of record from where you can then operationalize it. You can do something with it. And then the final thing is measure. So measuring things and retrospectively understanding why metrics have changed. So those are sort of the three components we have in platform, and that's also how the platform actually plays out. When I'll show you in a sec into those three components. Typical use cases. Most of the time, what people day-to-day use is a pipeline. So there'll be a pipeline doing forecasting on their pipeline. Pipeline. In our world, it means there's a model running every hour, pulling the deal data out and doing forecasting. That forecasting would be typically out of the box for us. It's predicting which deals are the probability of each deal's close, when to date each deal is supposed to close, the amount size of the deal. We also do forecasting into the future beyond the current pipeline, and then you can use that to then better understand where you're at in your pipeline versus the reported forecasting numbers you have. Similarly, around basically anything you can predict on the company deal contact level, right? So that could be lead scoring, it could be sort of an ICP fit, it could be a value of the company in terms of contract sizes. There's all of these things again where we have a model running, and that output of that model is a prediction about the record, be it a contact, a deal, or company, and we put that back into the CRM for you to use. So that's the typical day-to-day use. And then as I was saying before, the layer up is you then go into our platform to do some deeper analysis. It could also be optimizing marketing spend or anything like that. Should I just jump in and show? Let me show, because why not? So this is my demo account. It's connected. This demo account is connected specifically to HubSpot and a few other data sources. So the way it works for us is you can connect to many data sources. We connect into CRM, Salesforce, HubSpot, Mixpanel, etc. We also connect into common databases, data warehouses, BigQuery, Snowflake, etc., as well as a few other different types of data stores like file shares, Google Sheets, Google Drive, etc. So you can pull in data from all of these. You can then join them in our system whichever way you want. Typically, you might only most people work on one data source at a time, but sometimes you might want to join multiple data sources and do analysis on it. In this case, I have a range of different data sources. I'll quickly show what that looks like. So these are my configured data sources. In this, I have Salesforce, I have HubSpot. Actually, I have two HubSpot connections there, a couple of BigQueries, a Mixpanel connection. So I can join things from Mixpanel with HubSpot and do analysis on that. And the way you set it up, pretty straightforward. For HubSpot, you just say, connect to HubSpot, auth, connection. It'll ask you to approve. We're on the HubSpot marketplace. So just say, okay, do you want to connect to this application called Infer? You say yes, and that's all go, and that's it for you. Then once you've connected, you can then go and do some analysis. I'll quickly show an example of what an insight project looks like, because that's a good start. So I was talking about insight project pipelines and metrics here. So let me show quickly what an insight project looks like. So I'm going to create a new project. So we talk about projects as a way of doing a piece of research, really, or piece of insight that you want to do. I'm going to find a nice little data set. I'll pull one out of that's quick to run. So that's one from BigQuery. Here's a data set of 10,000 anonymized bank customers. It's an all cattle competition. So I'm going to point to that particular data set, that particular BigQuery instance, and I want to do some analysis on those bank customers. I want to try and understand something about them. So when you start a project, an insights project in our platform, you have two options. You can either go from scratch. That means if you want to write, basically if you want to write SQL in our SQL variant, which is a very standard SQL variant, to pull data out of your data warehouse or out of your HubSpot. So we have a way of pulling data using SQL out of HubSpot, for example, and then do the analysis yourself. You know what you want to do. You've been in this platform before. Then we say, create your own view. If you're a little bit new to it, or it's a new data set you haven't seen before, you can use the no-code interface. We call it Coworker. I'm going to do that for us. So what it's doing now is basically going to the data set. And this case, there's only 3 tables, so it's very quick for it to analyze. It analyzes each table to try and understand what type of analysis would make sense to run on this. And obviously, Coworker has trained on all the different types of analysis we have and we've done, and we've given a lot of information about the type of analysis you should be doing. So from that, it's then saying, okay, here's some things that would be worth doing on this data set. It has identified as a customer data set, so it's come up with 4 typical use cases that it knows it can solve with the data it has around customers. So the first one is predictive model that it can build for predicting churn. So what that would give us is a model that for each customer would give us a score, basic probability of how likely a customer is to churn, as well as some insights about what is driving churn. Similarly, about credit score, about customer's balance. Remember, this is a bank customer data set, so it's basically the balance. And the final thing is saying it can also build a segmentation model. So that would be a traditional segmentation model where it builds 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 personas. Each persona will be defined by the demographics of the customers and behavioral traits. And it would do it by churn. That means that it's saying it's going to build a segmentation where each segment is either 100% churn or 100% not churn. And it's basically dividing all your customers into 2 sets and then segmenting them there. So you get like 4 or 5 personas of people who are churned and 4 or 5 people who are not churned. And that gives you an idea of what kind of personas you are, successful with and not successful, which is very useful for things like marketing spend, right? This basically gives you the attributes you should be running when you're running your marketing, when you're marketing campaign. So I'm gonna do the customer churn one, since I think this Kaggle competition, when it really originally was put out, was about analyzing customer churn. I'm going to click run on that. I'm going to accept the suggestion. So what it's doing now, it's pulling the data out of BigQuery in this case. It is creating a machine learning model on the fly. It is training that machine learning model on the fly, and it is then executing it and analyzing the outputs to predict churn based on the historic data set that I've just pointed it to. This might take 1, 2, 3 minutes.
So would you, on that note, so you mentioned it's doing all that stuff on the fly. So does that mean, like, if you ran this analysis today, and let's say you ran it again tomorrow, would you get 2 different outcomes?
If the data has
if the data has changed even slightly, then yes.
Even slightly, not so much. Is like if it's a relatively decent sized data set, so the change in material to the data set, the model is stable, it will just have a slight impact on it, maybe no impact at all. If there's a big change in the data, all of a sudden your customer population has doubled and they're all different traits, then it would be a different model. What it means is that you never have any, from an analyst perspective, you never have any sort of concern about, is this model recently been trained? Is it old? So like it's always fresh. And when you run models every night to put it back into your HubSpot, this has been trained on latest data. So now it's come back. It took a couple of minutes. It's relatively fast, and we spent a lot of time making sure these models are fast enough that you can do this kind of quick iterative analysis again. I'll quickly show a few things about what we're looking at, and then I'll talk a bit about how that works. So there's 3 steps to the analysis and the result screen that we output when you've done a piece of analysis. At the bottom, we have the raw output. So the raw output shows you for every customer, so that's the input data. This is the input data that was fetched out of the data of the database. It has customer IDs, balance, age, some demographics about each customer, and then whether or not the customer has churned or not. In this case, it's indicated with a 0 or 1. Again, the model has knows that, whether it's indicated true or false, 0, 1, or whatever, it doesn't matter. It will figure that out. And then these two new columns here are the model's output. So it has said, it has come up with a prediction for each customer, has come up with a probability for each customer, right? So in this case, it has, yes, it's predicted that the customer already churned will churn. It has an interesting enough someone here who hasn't churned yet and is giving a 30% chance that this person might churn, right? Here's a couple of people who haven't churned yet, they're getting quite low probabilities. So this is essentially giving you a prediction per customer level. And this is what you would then feed back into your system of record or back into your database to then use downstream, right? This is the kind of stuff your CS team will be looking at in a dashboard somewhere to see who's most likely to churn, or your marketing team who should we send an email with a discount code. Scrolling up, we get 2 sections. We call this the evidence, and there's 2 levels of evidence: the summary ones and the detailed the detailed ones about particular properties of a customer in this case. So let me quickly go through the summary ones. The 2 interesting one is the accuracy of the model. So that's always the first thing to look at. Is this a good enough model that we should even care? Whether it's a good enough model relates to whether or not there's any predictive power in that data set. So we run through a lot of, when we build a model, we fine tune it and so on and so on. But sometimes there just isn't any predictive power in that data, right? It might be that whether customer churns or not is completely random, has nothing to do with anything we know about the customer. In this case, you get a low probability, low accuracy of your model, which is also an insight. It just means that there's no pattern. In this case, it is pretty decent. It's a good enough model to continue with our analysis. We always bracket them, no matter what type of model is run underneath the hood. We always put it in this like 0 to 100%, where, you know, it's green, amber, red, right? And if it's green, it's good, you can use it. If it's amber, maybe use it for some insights, but not too, don't use the detailed predictions per customer. If it's red, don't use it. So that's the first thing for an analyst to check. In this case, it's good. So let me just quickly go into what we call the feature importance. So that's the next step of your analysis, to see what are the main things driving this prediction in your data set. So in this case, we're looking at churn, and it turns out that 50% in this bank of whether a customer churns or not is down to the number of products they bought. Seems obvious, but yes, okay. Probably the more they bought, the better. The next, I'll come back to a point about that in a sec. The next one down is age. So about 18% of whether a customer churns, so about a fifth, let's say a fifth of whether a customer churns or not in this bank is driven by the age. That's a more interesting insight. There might be something there we need to look into. And then so on and so forth. There's also sometimes an interesting insight in something that is not important. In this case, credit score is almost completely irrelevant. You might think that should have been relevant. It wasn't. So that's also an interesting insight. Once you're done there, you then actually want to dig a little deeper to understand how are these things related. So we know that a fifth of whether or not a customer churns or not is down to their age, but how? Like, what is the insight here? So then we can generate all these different charts, which are basically explaining that for each one of the properties on the customer. Now let me click into age, because we just looked at that. So this chart shows you, and we have a number of charts for each one of the different properties, depending on how you like to view it. I like this one. So here we're showing the predictions of the likelihood of churn coming out of the model per customer, plotted against their age. And then we can clearly see the trend here, right? So it turns out that if a customer is below 35, they have a low, less than 20% likelihood of churning. Once they turn 35, it shoots up till, 46, when it's at its absolute peak. They're almost certain to churn, 86% likely to churn, which is like everyone just leaves. And then it comes back down, which probably makes sense, because as you get older, you're probably less likely to change bank. So that's sort of the insight, the next level of insight. Now we understand which factors drive churn, but now we understand how each one of these factors drive churn. And that's where you can, as I was coming back to my point before, this is where you do that second tier of insights, right? When you really want to understand what's going on in your business. Yeah, and you can go through all these. Just quickly at the top of this, we have a little bit of a summary of all of this. So if you don't have time to read this, you can always read the one at the top, which basically summarizes the 4 key insights. So 3 or 4 key insights about this analysis. Here you can see it's the second insight is age. It says, okay, it shows that churn goes up with age. And so it sort of extracted that from the underlying analysis. So yeah, that's the core of an insights project. And there's many other, this is predicting churn, but you can also imagine you can predict time to close for a deal. It can do forecasting into the future of revenue numbers, and we have forecasting methods. Yes, and I was showing before, it can do segmentation analysis as well. It can predict LTV of customers. Anything that is predictive, this part of the platform can do.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I love how I mean, easy and seamless it is to get at that. And so you showed, so obviously you have some insights here. You mentioned how you can go the call it the standard SQL route if you want. You can leverage the platform to kind of generate a bunch of this stuff for you in a very natural conversational sort of way. And then I think you said there's pipelines, the pipelines piece that's on here too. So what's that all about?
Yeah, so that's when you want to operationalize something. So let's say we have a model here that does churn analysis. We like it. Again, just coming back to how fast it is, that was the whole point of why we built it this way.
Yeah.
Imagine you wrote up this spec, you gave it to a data science team. How long would it take before you got this insight back, right?
And then how many iterations would you need to actually get the right one?
Because I nailed this in first iteration because it's a demo.
Yeah.
But typically what you end up doing is you look at this and you go, I want to join in some more data. Or I want to remove the number of products. That's not relevant to me. Let me remove that, and which you can easily do in a no-code interface. Let me rerun, and then sort of that's the iteration. But again, you can do that yourself in minutes. Here's a pipelines. So this is when you have, let's say we have this great churn model now. We want to put that back into, let's say, our CRM. We want to put the prediction down here on a customer level back into our CRM so our CS team can do something with it, or our marketing team. And that's what we call a pipeline. So if I click here, I can create a pipeline. I call this customer churn pipeline. Basically, a pipeline is a schedule on top of this analysis you just done. We're basically saying we want to run this analysis on a schedule. I can say I'm going to start it 10 o'clock. Let's start say from tomorrow. We're going to run it daily, but you can run it hourly as well, and many other patterns here. And then you can say, where do you want to write this back? Currently, it's writing it back into my database, but I could also write it back into HubSpot. Let's say I want to write it back into HubSpot. It's just going to load up the schema from HubSpot here. It might take a sec. So now let's say, which HubSpot object am I going to write it into? Let's write into the contact. Now we have to match up the ID. So this world is called custom ID. In HubSpot, it's just called ID. So that's basically matching up the records from the outputs of our analysis with the record in the object in HubSpot. And now which column do I want to write? I think let's write the probability column from this output. And now we can pick a column in HubSpot. We should probably have created one, but I'll pick a random one. Down here, I think I have one probably called Infer lead score, which is one of my pipelines currently running. I'm going to write it into that field because I know that's a number field. You can add more mappings as well. So I could also say, oh, I also want to run the prediction. I want to put that into something, etc., etc. So basically now I'm saying these outputs of this analysis, I want to run that on a schedule, and I want to put it into my HubSpot this way. That's basically it. It's going to give me a quick, might take a couple of minutes actually. It's going to do a quick preview to show you these are the records, these are the values in that field today, and this is what they're going to be, just to make sure you are okay with running this pipeline before it overrides your data. But let's say I was, and I click confirm, and then basically that's it. I'll show you quickly. I have a few pipelines already. Now to create the pipeline, I'm going to go straight and post it so it doesn't actually overwrite my HubSpot. I have a number of different ones here already running, putting data into my HubSpot. Here's a lead scoring one. Here's a couple of deal probability to close, deal close days, etc. These are all the same type of analysis, running on schedule and putting data back into my HubSpot. I can quickly actually, can you see this HubSpot now? Yeah, I think you can. So this is my little dashboard of predicted values. So here, I just showed I had a pipeline predicting the close date of every deal in my HubSpot. It predicts the value of every deal, and it predicts the probability of every deal to close, so basically the weight. And this is my little forecast dashboard here where I'm looking at those predictions, right? So this date down here is the predicted date of closing. as opposed to the enter date by the sales rep. And these numbers are basically the weighted value, right? So the amount we predict that the deal is worth times the probability of that deal. And that gives you basically a different look. We have put up a little dashboard here actually where I can compare it to my like the values, the standard values in my HubSpot here. So you can see in my HubSpot today, I have 750,000 in my proposal stage, and I'm predicting there's only about 660 there. So there's a discrepancy, and that's then something you want to look into. Here you can see we have a couple of, this is again, standard dashboard stuff that you can do. Once you have all these values in your HubSpot, you can slice and dice it whichever way you want in HubSpot. Here I'm showing for each sales rep, and this is me, so you can see how much have I reported. So I've said I'm gonna, and how much are we predicting that I'm going to close on each one of these months, or how much is
You're sandbagging. You're
yeah.
sandbagging there.
Yeah, I'm way under. I was be like, yeah, it could be about a million.
Yeah.
No, it's actually 2.4.
Yeah.
So yeah, so this is the kind of stuff you can do once you have these pipelines. We have a number of standard pipelines. Let me see if I can quickly show you what it looks like here. So when you first connect your HubSpot, we basically give you a number of predefined options of what kind of pipelines you can just out of the box install. So these are like a revenue forecast, the deal size, the deal probability to close, all of this stuff. And each one of these is has a predefined model underneath. I'll show you quickly what if you're into SQL, this is what the SQL underneath looks like. That defines this particular model for you, and it'll be a custom model for you. And then it'll set up a schedule, running it every day if you click schedule to run and put that back into your HubSpot. So yeah, that's the typical sort of, as I was talking about before, this is what it looks like when it ends up in your system of record. This is just quickly, this is a pure forecast, meaning these are forecasts on deal levels that then gets aggregated up. This is a forecast on the total revenue number across, I think it gets forecasted across every week, and then I sum it up to every month in this case. So that's basically looking beyond the current pipeline and gives you a good indication of what's sort of coming later in the year, or should be coming based on historical trends.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So yeah, that's basically a pipeline. The third element to the platform, I only briefly mentioned, is metrics. So the idea of a metric is you have all these standard metrics, right? Like days to close, win rate, etc. What if it changes? What happened? So let me go into one here. This is my days to close. So in my demo, this is pulling data out of my demo HubSpot. Let me look at 30 days. That's maybe a bit better. In the last 30 days, my days to close have gone up by 1.1%. Okay, not a huge change, but a change. Now, top of this dashboard basically shows you a standard dashboard. This is the change, this is etc. The interesting thing is when we attribute two factors. So in this case, we can see the change is 1.1% in the wrong way. It's gone up, which is bad. We've indicated that's bad for days to close. Now, where did that come from? And we can then dig in, and it says the biggest contributor, a bit like what we saw before, it said the biggest contributor is age and number of products. Here said the biggest contributor to this change is deals with the industry is information technology and services. It turns out that has decreased from 25 to 11 deals in the last, 30 days. And that has had a negative impact on the days to close, because I guess we close these deals fast and now there's less of them. so the average day to close has gone down. Number of employees have actually contributed in a positive way. So we've increased that slightly, and that has had a positive impact, but that's been pulled the other way by other factors. Again, consumer goods, we've done more deals in consumer goods. That has contributed 0.3% of the increase in days to close. And so on. So this is kind of how you can, and then you can apply filters on top of that. You can basically dig in. You can say, oh, I only want to look at it in a particular town, or I want to look at it at a country level, or whatever, when you sort of dig even deeper into it. And that's retrospectively. The other thing is predicting things. This is retrospectively analyzing something that's happened in the past to then get an insight about what can you do to fix it, or why did that change?
Yeah. I love that, because I think of all the times that I've been asked, like, well, why? Right? Like, okay, so the number went up or down, and it's like, well, why? And it's like, all right, well, how much time do you have, right? Because I'll I'll need another day or two to figure that out instead of being able to just click a few buttons and answer that question right away, which you can do here.
Yeah, exactly. This is the kind of question one answer, like how many times an analyst or RevOps person not been asked, like, oh, win rate has dropped by Y. And then what do? You dump all the data out, you start pivot tabling, you start dashboarding, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
at the end, you come up with a result, but it takes a long time. And yeah, it's a lot of other things to do.
yeah, yeah. It's something that might appear or seem like such an easy question or even an innocent question, right? But those are typically the worst culprits when it comes to the amount of work that would normally need to be done to answer the very basic question of why.
Yeah.
So
Stop sharing
yeah,
that one. That was a lot of
yeah.
platform.
No, that's incredible. And I think yeah, I mean, even as you were walking through that, I was just thinking of all the time that it could have saved me back in the day with leading RevOps and BizOps, because yeah, a lot of that stuff that was being done in spreadsheets, or maybe I didn't have the technical like aptitude to do myself, where I had to rely on engineers and my data team, could have been done super easily with a product like Infer. So I guess a couple of kind of last questions. So you mentioned some of the popular integrations, right? Being able to connect into CRMs like HubSpot and Salesforce, databases. Uh, and I'm not sure maybe what the shorter answer is here, but is there, I guess, what are maybe the most popular integrations that you have? And then is there anything maybe that you don't integrate with today, but might be on the roadmap or something that would otherwise be popular?
Yeah, in terms of most popular, it's a bit of a mix. I mean, we have a fair few on HubSpot, for we've hit that quite well. We have a few on Salesforce as well in terms of CRMs. And then otherwise it's databases. Often people will have both. They'll have connected to a database, the data warehouse they might use in the company, be it BigQuery, be it Azure, be it Snowflake, and then they'll have a connection into the CRM. Typically for us right now, that's HubSpot. We're partnered with HubSpot, but we also have some Salesforce integrations there. In terms of where we're heading, integrations we don't do. I don't think there's anything we don't do. As in, like, we don't do it today,
Yeah,
but we will in the future. Like, we're always building out integrations, whatever
yeah,
people, so wherever that takes us, wherever people are interested in having. We're currently building out an integration to Looker, for example, so putting models out of Looker. If people have a data team doing a lot of LookML modeling, then we can pull them out into here to do more analysis again.
yeah,
Yeah, that's I think that's a never-ending journey for most companies.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. And who you mentioned different some different customers and what they're doing or using today. So I guess for folks who might be looking at this, who like who's typically a good fit for the Infer product or platform? Is it certain industries, certain company sizes, certain verticals? Like who might be out there, you know, kind of looking at this today that would be a good fit for the platform, and then any kind of current customers that you can share as well.
Yeah, so in terms of who would be a good fit, there needs to be a certain, to use predictive analytics, you need to have a certain size in terms of, really in terms of data volumes, right? That's the bottleneck. Like, so what that means can vary a bit depending on what kind of deals you're doing and what that looks like and what you're after. But there is always that, and that's where I think it's the biggest bottleneck for people. How that then relates, typically that relates to a certain maturity of the business and a certain, often also linked to a certain revenue number on the commercial side. Those things are just ultimately what it is about data sizes, but those data sizes are often linked to, like, a company is at this stage of its lifetime, it's making 5-10 million revenue. Now they have a certain amount of customers that it's worth doing predictive analytics on it, right? If you have 10 customers, you can easily write that in a spreadsheet. Don't need us. And then also we can't do a good job of it. So typically in the hundreds, in terms of a SaaS business, you would be in the hundreds of existing customers, and in the hundreds of, thousands of old opportunities. And you have that in your system, right? That we can connect to it if it's your database or it's your CRM. Then we can start doing something around forecasting, around lead scoring metrics, et cetera, et cetera. And those are typical use cases right now that people do a lot more once we come in, and they could do things around marketing optimization, marketing spend optimization, LTV. We have people doing forecasting on consumption, so like a user consumption in their platform, all this stuff. But the typical entry is a very sort of sales, new business related use case, and then we grow from there because they're very easy and have an immediate impact. So yeah, that's also what most of our current customers are doing. The first thing they do is one of those. They will have the pain point will be like, we need better forecasting. We need better understanding of our funnel, our top funnel. That can be lead scoring, that can be better analysis of it. We need some marketing analysis, and then we need, explainable sales metrics. That's sort of where we because those cutting right. But those we can typically serve those needs in a matter of days. Like we say, in terms of implementation, it's just so you get a login, you click connect to HubSpot. Now you already have your first analysis run. We then work with you to iterate on that to make sure it's good, but you'll have something on day one. And now we can then spend a few days with you. Typically what we do is like we book in a few sessions, follow up. And it's all about tweaking that little bit, that model, and sort of upskilling people. What should they be looking for? And then putting it on a pipeline, and then they have something. So we say it's a few days, and then they should have something in their HubSpot. Ideally, if they have a very vanilla, straightforward setup, it's like click of a button, it's done. But that's right.
And so you kind of answered my next question there on the implementation side, but it does sound like one, to get started, you can essentially like self-serve, kind of onboard yourself, right? You don't need people on your team to be behind the scenes clicking buttons, configuring things. You can do that on your own, but you all do provide support during the implementation process just to make sure that users can understand all the different ways that they can kind of get value from end to end with the metrics, the insights, and the pipelines, and at least have a couple of like use cases under their belt before they just kind of take off running on their own.
Exactly. And how we often do is we say, like, in the first 30 days, you should have almost you should have a return on what you've given, right? Because we believe, so if you can't, then maybe this isn't the tool for you. We believe so strongly that within a week, you should have something up and running that's providing really high value. Yeah, and as you said, there's no real configuration for us on the back end, like clicking. It's more getting you familiar and comfortable. Doing the analysis yourself from now on, right? That's our onboarding, really.
And how can, if someone is looking at this and they want to either give it a try or get started with you all, do you offer either a free trial? Is there a like a proof of concept? Do they need to take a demo and go through the sales process with you all? What's the best way for someone to get rolling?
Get in touch with us. We do like to talk to people. We used to have a sort of PLG style thing, but I think it works much better if we have a quick conversation about your needs. Then we can also guide you. Again, underneath there is a very horizontal platform. There's a million things you can do. So it's best to basically we ask people to almost, ice scoring, like the impact that, like we ask people to just think about your problems you have today, which one of them is the one that, and then we sort of help them pick the one that is easiest to solve today and gives the most impact. I think that's best in a conversation. So yeah, we always have that, and do a demo, traditional way of getting in touch with us.
And last question for you is, what's the obviously you mentioned horizontal platform, tons of different things that someone can do with the tool or the product. There's obviously like other ways people can accomplish, I'll say, like some of those things, right? They can have a team, they can have people manually doing stuff, other tools, technology that's out there. So if you had to pick one thing and one thing only that really differentiates Infer from, from other technology solutions, other manual ways of accomplishing the things that you allow people to accomplish with the platform, what's the one thing that sets you apart or really puts you all at the top?
Many things. I think the one thing that really stand out is how customizable it is and how easy it is to do it. It is essentially turning you into a data scientist, whether you're a data scientist or not, or giving you the entire data science team now, right? We're not, boxing you in with anything specific. We do have easy click of a button, get started. But after that, you can do anything you want more or less on the platform, right? It's really easy. Anyone who's sort of an analyst mind, and we used to say a curious mind as a thing, a platform for curious mind. This is like your platform for doing this type of analysis without having to have a data scientist or become one yourself. I think that's the point.
Yeah. And I like even I think like, right, you solve one of those problems or use cases for someone, right? And that's a big unlock moment for them, because then they realize what they can use a tool like this for, and all the other things that they might come across that they can potentially solve now with a solution like this. And so it's really enabling them to understand how powerful the platform is and all the different things that they can do with it. And then, like you said, they can be off to the races from there.
Yeah, get people started. And again, that's why we always try to narrow one use case down, get you started, and then there's nothing better than when people come back later and they're like, I have an idea. And we're like, that's a great idea. You do that.
Yeah.
Because then they've sort of grasped it, they grokked it, right? And now they're starting to think about all these things that before were like off limit because you don't have the capability to do it, that you can now start doing. And that's great. That's a great feeling for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Erik, the tool looks incredible, looks amazing. Like I said, I wish I would have had it years ago. And I was kind of leading RevOps and BizOps teams, super valuable to every revenue operator out there today. And so anyone who's interested in getting in touch with Erik or somebody on his team, inferlabs.io is the website that you can go get in touch, and they can kind of hook you up with a way to get started. Erik and his team are also in the RevOps Co-op Slack group, so you can hit them up and find them there. And then LinkedIn is another place where you can find him and the rest of the Infer crew. So with that, thank you very much, Erik. I appreciate it, but I will let you run. So have a good one, and thanks, y'all. I'll see you on the flip side.